Welcome to In the News for July 9th, 2021. My name is Brett Burney, and I am from appsinlaw.com.
Hi, everybody. This is Jeff Richardson from New Orleans.
Good morning, Jeff. It is good to talk with you, of course, every week. And, you know, if there's one thing that I have come to learn about you is that you take very good notes.
I do. I got your little twist there because I use an app called GoodNotes.
Exactly.
I didn't know doing there.
And I love it. You've actually been a guest on my podcast on appsinlaw.com. And I remember it fondly because you talked a lot about how you use the iPad all the time and you use GoodNotes for even just like having by your side, like having almost like a notebook because it's so easy to use. But in today's In the News blog post on iPhoneJD.com, you did a great job of like explaining in sort of real life, in your professional life, as it were, about how you have actually been using the notes not only to prepare for an appellate argument you did, but also to use the iPad, which I just thought was fascinating. I love the real life stuff.
Yeah. I really like using the iPad to take handwritten notes. And I know that a lot of people, when they sort of write out an outline to give a presentation, whether you're a lawyer or any other field, they use a computer. Right. And I can certainly type faster than I handwrite. So I totally understand the appeal of that. It takes me longer to get the first draft of an outline in handwriting on an iPad and an app like GoodNotes. But in the long run, I actually find it far, far better because once you have your initial outline, you're going to start moving things around. And when I say outline, that makes it sound too formal. I don't really have like, numbers and sub things. It's just, I'm just sketching things out on the page. Sometimes I'll write something in the margin. Sometimes if I wanted to quote something like a statute for like a law, for like a legal argument, I will just, find a copy of that statute online or download it from Westlaw and just take a screenshot of it and crop it in and then put that in my notes and highlight the part that I want to read out loud and use different colors and then move things around because something that originally was on page 1, now I want to put to page 3. And then I have like a separate page of if I'm asked about this, I want to say this. And by the time you're done and you've moved things around so many different times, it's just great to have those dynamic notes. And usually when I'm done, I print them out on a color laser printer and I just have them in my hand. And I did that for an oral argument that I did last week. But I had another one yesterday that was in the Fifth Circuit, and I found the courtroom was just a little darker. I mean, not too dark, but dark enough that it was nice to have the backlit screen of the iPad. Yeah. So I just held the iPad, in portrait orientation. I had it at the podium and I picked it up a little bit. And it was nice to just be able to give the argument directly from the iPad, just swiping from page to page. But what was especially nice is that I had both because I didn't know going into any courtroom, am I going to want to use the iPad? Am I going to want to use the paper? Am I going to have some last minute epiphany the morning of oral argument and I want to jot down some new notes? So now the iPad version is the current version, or vice versa. Did I write something on the handwritten notes that's the current version? So it's just nice to have both with you. But I definitely encourage folks, if you need to prepare for something where you're going to be speaking, to use it. Another nice thing about handwritten notes is there's a tendency when you type, if you're like me, you end up just basically writing a speech as if you're going to read it word from word from the document. That's just the way that we think. Whereas when you're handwriting, you're not going to write down word for word what you're going to say because it would take, I mean, I guess you could, but it takes a long time. So it sort of forces you to write down concepts instead of a transcript, which is better when you're giving a presentation because you don't want to look like, here I am reading my transcript of what I was going to say. You want to be dynamic and you want it to seem live and impromptu, and you can glance at your notes for reminders of what to say next and to quote something specifically if you wanted to, quote something that someone else said, what a witness said at trial. But then otherwise you're just speaking more extemporaneously. So it works great.
It's almost like some people say, like, if you're just going to read what you typed, then might as well just hand the judge or, somebody in your audience what you typed out. Like what they really want to know is sort of, like you said, your dynamism, like they want to see you giving that, either that presentation, because it goes the same, I think, for PowerPoint presentations as well, or keynote presentations. But, quickly, I want to go back to one thing you said, Jeff, because you and I have talked about this quite a bit separately and on podcasts and things. It's just using the iPad to take handwritten notes. And you use GoodNotes. I like GoodNotes. I actually find myself using the Notability app a little bit more, which I think, they're both excellent apps. And I both highly recommend both of them. But you actually had a post that you linked to from about 3 or 4 years ago in 2017, where you go in and you do a good job of showing how you take your notes. And the one thing I want to zero in on that you just mentioned was the fact that handwriting notes, as good as it is, with the iPad, the fact that we can use an Apple Pencil, handwrite the note, but here you've got a good picture right here. One of the things you can do in GoodNotes and Notability and a variety of other note-taking apps is you can circle something that you've written down, or sometimes they call it the lasso tool, right? You can circle that and then you can move it. And you alluded to this because I love the fact that I'm still taking handwritten notes, but if I like, I need to add another subsection to this outline or this area there, instead of like erasing or having to rewrite it somewhere, you can just circle it and it makes like a copy, or you can literally move it almost like an object, like you can move an object on a PowerPoint presentation, a slide or something like that. And I don't know that people fully grasp that, Jeff. Even when you and I talk about it and we show people that is so incredibly effective. The only thing I'm sad about is I didn't have this when I went to school, undergrad into law school, because it would have been so amazingly helpful. And I make sure that my kids know about this today, of course, when they go to school.
And it's not just a feature. For me, that is the feature.
Yes,
and I say that
exactly.
because you alluded to being in class. If you're in class and you're taking notes, yes, sometimes you might want to go back and add something in. But normally, if I'm in a seminar and I'm taking notes, you're just going to take notes in the order that the person is speaking. But when you're preparing something for yourself, that's the whole point. Is that you're going to move things around. Originally, you think I'm going to say this, and then you say, oh no, I need to say this between this and this. Oh, and then this point here, it really has more to do with the thing I'm going to be talking about later. So you just lasso it and you cut it and you paste it somewhere else. Right. And whether you're cutting just like one specific note or the note and the thing you pasted below it and the thing that's nice about these notes also is, they're so visual. The one that you're showing on the screen is a good example that, as you are working with your notes, if you think visually like I do, you can sort of almost imagine where it is on the page and what it looks like and sort of what the colors are and whether you have a box on the right side. And so when you're giving a presentation, you can just glance down and your eyes instantly know what you're looking for. So it's like you almost don't even have to read the heading to know that this is the thing that I wanted to quote or cite right here. But it all comes from it being in your own handwriting, using different colors, and then moving things around using the lasso tool. So, and that's the reason why when you first write things down, it takes you a little bit longer to use handwriting. I completely understand that. But in the long run, with moving everything around, you both save time and you have better, more effective notes.
Yeah. And by the way, both Notability and GoodNotes now offer this, although GoodNotes was first out of the gate on this. Like, you've got some excellent handwriting, by the way. May I say so, sir? But both GoodNotes and Notability will actually now allow you to search your handwriting. Now, I can presume, because I like your handwriting here, it's probably going to do a little bit of a better job than some of my chicken scratching or some of the other folks that we know that may not have as quite legible handwriting. But man, it does a pretty good job. I don't know how often that you use that. I don't find myself using it all that much, Jeff, but just knowing that it's there, that I can search for something that I actually hand wrote. A lot of people like that. It's not 100%, right? Because it's going to depend on your handwriting. And sometimes, a lowercase L might be translated as a numeral 1, that kind of a thing. Sometimes it's not going to be 100%, but it's very good. And both, it's just amazing to me the iPad can do that today.
I use it all the time because I have a separate notebook for each case that I'm working on or each project. And so I'll be adding notes, I'll add some notes today. I'll come back next week and add another page. And after 6 months, a year and a half, I've got, dozens of pages, hundreds of, tons of notes. And if I just wanted to say, gosh, I know at one point we talked about this engineer that we might retain, Dr. Smith. I can just quickly search for Smith, and I'm amazed how quickly it finds it. You said that my handwriting looks good. That's because the one that you're showing on screen was the screenshot that I chose to include, where I wrote a little bit more neatly. I'm often writing more quickly.
Well done.
And it's a little more chicken scratch. And yet GoodNotes still does a pretty good job of reading my handwriting. It's not perfect, but so if I do a search for Smith, it may find 8 of the 9 times I wrote it, but that's going to be enough for me to find the pages where I'm talking about it.
Exactly. And like you said, it's like that visual component. And when when we take the time to handwrite that down, it just reiterating your point there, it helps us. Like once I can get to the general area where I need to be, that's going to be great as well. So speaking of notes, I think you had one other link in today's post, which I thought was great, talking about, we're starting to see quite a number of stories about folks reviewing the new features coming in iPad OS 15 or iOS 15. And there's a few features coming up from the Notes app, which I got to tell you, not only did I like this story that you linked to, like the support for tags, but I actually I think last week I did download iPad OS 15 on my iPad. And just the fact that I can do a quick note now, I love it. Like iOS 15 isn't a huge update. Like it's not as revolutionary as some of the other ones that we've seen, but I am getting pretty excited about the small things, including this story that you linked to here about the Notes app with support for tags.
Yeah, Apple's built-in Notes app is a very good app. I mean, long ago, we both remember years ago when it was incredibly simplistic and you had to use a third-party app, but it is very full-featured now, and Apple is giving great updates. So now you can have tags, so you can associate notes with a topic, and then you can find all the notes associated with the topic. I'm going to use that feature as soon as it's available. And the Quick Notes feature you said, which I think you take your Apple Pencil and you drag up for a corner, and it instantly so that'll be nice too. And they have notes associated with specific web pages and stuff like that. So the Notes app just continues to get better and better.
So this is the thing. You and I have used not only the Apple Notes app, but another one that I know a lot of people like, including David Sparks, is Drafts, the Drafts app. And the reason that app appealed to me is because so often, Jeff, I just need a quick scratch pad, right? Like I've got my phone, like I might be out, like somebody today was telling me about, I need to call a concrete professional to help out in our driveway. And, I didn't have like a pen and a paper in front of me, but I had my phone and I just needed a quick way to quickly write down a name and a phone number. And I would use a variety of different things, but I find more and more I do go to the Notes app, either on my phone or today, if I have my iPad, just like exactly like you said in this picture here, you just drag either your finger or the Apple Pencil up from the bottom right corner, and it comes up with this literally, I call it a scratch pad. They call it Quick Notes. I think Apple does. But it literally, you can have it either go to a most recent note or you can have it create a brand new note. So it's a little bit flexible in that. But it's just this extra little window that comes up now that you can move around the screen. And again, this is not in the current iOS 14. This is coming up in 15. So don't upgrade your necessary devices yet. We talked about that a week or two ago. But let us experiment with it. And this is on my iPad. I'm very excited about this, and it's just great. We're talking about just generally taking notes and having these devices to be able to take notes. And the Quick Note feature is going to be something really fantastic. We'll be talking about that a lot more in the next few months.
The Drafts app that you mentioned, just to finish your thought there, is that one of the selling features of it is as soon as you launch the app, it's instantly on a blank page for you to write something down. So it's the fastest way to jot something down. And I downloaded it for that very reason. Having said that, I found that I just went back to the Notes app, even though it did mean I would have to open the app and tap the button for a new note. So it took me just a fraction of a second longer to start my note, but I just preferred having everything in the one simple app. So although I did purchase Drafts to try it out, I found myself going back to Notes, but I know many people love Drafts. It's a good app.
Yeah, and Drafts will let you do a few other things, like you can, put it into a WordPress. I mean, there's all kinds of
it's a very powerful app,
very powerful. But like just to underscore the point that we're making, the fact that I just need something very simple. Anyway, I predict you're going to like the Quick Notes aspect on there as well when you get a chance to upgrade to that. So that's good stuff. Lots of notes. Okay, another thing that you linked to today, and something I don't think that we've talked about just a whole lot, is this was a story about the upcoming features in CarPlay, Apple CarPlay. Now, I'm going to predict, Jeff, that like me, you probably have started to use Apple CarPlay quite a bit. And it's amazing to me. When that first came out, I was kind of like, okay, that's fine. But, I already have like an interface in my car. And but I got to tell you, I never use the car interface anymore. Like as soon as I get in the car, I will plug in my iPhone into the car and my screen will be Apple CarPlay. I can't even stand the basic interface that's on cars. And frankly, when I used to rent cars and when we traveled, I hated it. I hated having to like deal with whatever that basic interface is. And I never thought about it before Apple CarPlay. But today, if I get in a car and I don't have Apple CarPlay, I am miserable.
I completely agree.
I don't know what that says about me, but that's the way it is today.
Most of those car interfaces too are, I mean, it's very poor user interface and buttons are hard to use. And the Apple interface and CarPlay just works so much better. I love, like you say, I plug in my phone and then CarPlay takes over the interface of my car and that's all I use. I would not even think about buying a car nowadays that did not have CarPlay in it.
Right.
And I love it because, I mean, I'm always, when I'm driving around, if my kids are with me, we're listening to music. If I'm by myself, I'm listening to a podcast. In fact, just last night, Brett, I was, I'll give you a plug for something that you might are going to talk about later on, but I was listening to a podcast and my podcast ended. And so the Overcast app, which is what I use to listen to podcasts, just automatically starts playing the next podcast that I had downloaded. I didn't even realize it, but the Overcast app had downloaded the latest episode of your Apps and Law podcast where you were interviewing Tara Cheever at Lit Software. So it's funny because I'm driving around and suddenly I hear Tara's voice and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I think I know that voice. And then I hear your voice. I'm like, what is Brett doing in my car? I didn't even realize that it had downloaded the new episode. So then I'm driving around listening to the new episode, which is very good, by the way. So so I love it for that. But I also love CarPlay for maps and for, the driver directions. I mean, just earlier this week, I had to go to the airport and we have a brand new airport in New Orleans. So it's in a different location than it used to be and everything's different. So it was nice to have CarPlay telling me, that you want to be in this lane, not that lane. And it was, I mean, I use it all the time and I love CarPlay and I love that it gets updated. Unlike the interface built into your car, which once you buy your car, it's never updated. For most people, CarPlay gets new features. So one of them that's coming out that you're showing now that I mentioned on iPhone JD this morning is this announced messages feature, which I already use on my AirPods.
Right.
And what it means is right now with CarPlay, if you're driving, you'll get a little ding if you have this turned on saying that you have a new text message. But then you need to either use Siri to say to read it or tap the screen, which I don't like driving. I don't like tapping the screen too much if I'm driving. But with this new feature turned on, you can have it so that when a text comes in, it will just ding and say, read your message, Brett says, don't forget we have a podcast to record this morning or whatever it is. And it'll just read it. And so that way, as I'm doing my business and driving around, it's just telling me the texts that are coming in. And if I want to respond, great. But sometimes just hearing the text is enough. So it just makes it more seamless, which I'm looking forward to using.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It made me think of maybe not even 4 or 5 years ago. I remember driving around with a good friend and he was all excited to show me the built-in GPS on his car. And
I remember when that was a thing.
Exactly, Jeff. That's what I'm saying. Like I looked at it and by that time, of course I already had Google Maps and Apple Maps. And I was just thinking, this looks so much worse than what I have on my phone. And he was very proud of it and it got him to where it goes, but it was just so primitive looking. And the point now to what you alluded to is that today when I pull in, I can't even imagine using a built-in GPS. Like gone are those days, even though that was a huge thing when some of that came out. But now I can use not only Google Maps or Apple Maps, or you can see on the screen here, this gentleman on this great blog, by the way, you can use Waze. You can use a variety of other apps that whatever the developers allow to be available in CarPlay is great. Not to mention the fact, you see he's got Spotify on here, which I use. I know I use Apple Music. But, instead of taking your eyes off the road to like try to find a specific song or to go in and navigate through songs, now I just invoke She Who Shall Not Be Named, and I just ask her to play a specific song, and it comes on. Like I don't even have to futz with everything,
or album or playlist or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's so nice. So nice. Like just things like that to make it so much more convenient and so much more effective. And now most of all of this that we're talking about is already available in CarPlay. It's just if some of these new features that are coming out, like you said, the announced messages, the driving focus. There is a I think it's called Do Not Disturb While Driving, right? That's what it's called now, a much longer name.
It's sort of the opposite of announced messages.
Exactly.
Either you want more stuff coming your way, or you really want to be, do not disturb me while I'm driving.
Right. So I know that, some of these are kind of small-ish kind of tweaks and updates that they're making to car maps, but this is a great video that you linked to that in this story that it's just, I think it just kind of emphasizes a little bit more about what CarPlay is doing. And I think it's great. The only thing is at least in my family, now we fight over all four of us have iPhones. And so now everybody wants to fight over who gets to plug in their iPhone for their playlist and whatever. Because you still do have to physically plug in the phone into the car, right? Yeah. I assume at some point I know it'll be wireless and Bluetooth, but to take advantage of this, they still have to have the physical connection to the phone.
Yeah, well, they have wireless versions of CarPlay, but only a few cars have it nowadays. But no, I know what you're talking about. Whenever my daughter gets in the car with me, she instantly wants to plug in her iPhone, so we listen to her music. Which, to be fair, sometimes it's okay. If nothing else, it gives me an education of what the pop music of the day is for my 13-year-old daughter.
Exactly. All right. So from CarPlay, again, it's almost like we can't go from a week to week without Apple talking about how Apple is maybe becoming a little bit more of a health conscious company. And I don't mean that for their own employees, although I know they do a good job for that. But you linked to an excellent podcast. I haven't had a chance to listen to it, but this is the vice president of health at Apple. And I don't know if you had a chance to listen to it, but she goes in talking about some of her past experience.
It's a great podcast. I listened to the whole thing. I mean, I started it and then listened to the whole thing last night. It's a podcast called Second Life by Hillary Kerr. And she interviews women who have changed their, started one career and moved to a different career. And so in this particular episode, she's interviewing Sambal Desai, who's the vice president of health at Apple. She has a fascinating backstory, which she describes in the podcast, and I won't spoil it, but suffice it to say she was at Disney, and then eventually, because of some health issues in her family, decided to go to med school, and now is in charge of all of this at Apple. So in terms of the health things that your watch can do and that your iPhone can do, she's the one that's pulling it all together, and it's very personal for her. I mean, she knows what a difference it can make in people's life. It's a fascinating story. It's one of those that, like, I started to listen to the first 5 minutes. The next thing you know, I had listened to the whole 30-minute podcast. It was great. So it's worth listening to. And, another thing that I linked to in today's post is, and I link to these all the time because unfortunately they happen all the time. It was another example of somebody whose life was saved with an Apple Watch. This story was somebody in, what state was it? Michigan, I think.
Michigan, yes.
She bought her husband an Apple Watch for his birthday. And so a few weeks later, he decided to buy one for her, even though he said she wasn't sure she wanted one. And she was just looking at her watch, and she noticed that her heart rate was like at 168, which is really high if you're not working out or anything. And she called her husband and said, I wonder if it means anything. And it turns out that she had a heart attack and didn't realize it. And it was this blockage in her artery that if it had not been fixed immediately, like the second heart attack would have been fatal. So this is just one of these, oh my goodness. So she was so happy. But, whether it's reports of people falling down and the Apple Watch can call 911, or people just seeing something about their own health, it's really, you don't want to be dire, like, get an Apple Watch or you're going to die, but there are cases, even if they are isolated, where Apple Watch makes a huge difference in people's life. So, and combine this with one of the things that was discussed in that podcast we were just talking about is Sambal Desai said that with iOS 15, you can choose to share your health data with someone else, like a family member. Right. So you could, for example, if you had an elderly mother or father that had an Apple Watch monitoring their health and stuff, if they chose to do so and didn't have a privacy problem with it, they could share it with you. And that way you could actually sort of see, how is my mom or dad's heart rate going over time? How did they have a fall? Stuff like, even access medical records if you have that turned on. So it's optional. I mean, many people don't want to share things for privacy reasons, but just as many people might want to do that with someone that they trust, just to have somebody else looking out for them. So Apple is doing more and more in this field. It's great.
I almost feel like it's a justification if people think, oh my goodness, why would you pay that much for a watch? It ain't just a watch. To me, the Apple Watch, you and I have talked about this, it's so much more from, obviously it can tell you time, but I get my messages here. I get my weather on here. I get access to so much information. You can even download. I know Spotify, will let you download music, or Overcast. You can put podcast on there. So if I'm out mowing the yard, I don't even have to have my iPhone with me.
Do that all the time.
So much that it can do. And the fact that today, Apple knows, I think, that this is more of a health monitoring device, just because they're kind of doubling down on some of this. In fact, this is something I know a lot of people, I don't know if they know about it too much, but it was not too long, I think just a couple of years ago, that you can actually take an ECG on the Apple Watch. Now, there's all kinds of, fine print on here. This isn't something that you should do and trust. Go and see your health professional.
It's not as good as the one you get at the hospital, but it's better than nothing.
Of course. But this is, I just found this fascinating. Like, it literally, you can put your finger on the little digital crown once you open this ECG app, and it will take an ECG. Now, again, this is something that, just like what you were talking about, you can add to your health profile as you would. You can use this to go and talk to your doctor about this. It's just amazing. And one of the things I found this, I think it's at the bottom here, or maybe it's on another aspect, is that it is literally looking underneath. There are sensors underneath. I'll have to find this link on here, but it's like it's some kind of a reflection of your blood under your skin, whether it's green or red.
It's sending infrared light or something like that to bounce out.
It's
the way
way
that it
beyond
works
my
is
comprehension.
Fascinating. But
it is fascinating.
Yeah. By the way, I always called these EKG in the past, but who knows? I think that's the K is the German term, but ECG, EKG, whatever you call it, you can do it on a watch.
It really is just amazing what they're doing on this. And this story was fascinating. You can see this lady is talking about it. And what I also found interesting on here as well is that it, just like a lot of these things, unfortunately, it just started with the pain. She talked about pain in her neck and her shoulder. And, some people were saying, oh, maybe you just have some acid reflux as well. But no, she had the Apple Watch that was telling her exactly what you were saying. It's an extremely abnormal beats per second. And my wife, by the way, she has an Apple Watch. She checks this all the time. She's got history of some heart issues in her family. And I love having that additional comfort. Not that it's a complete confidence, but a little bit of extra comfort to know that she's watching that, monitoring that, so the Apple Watch will tell her if something abnormal. And so this lady that we're talking about here from Michigan, she had this Apple Watch. She was like, no, something is not right. Like, this is not just heartburn. This is something a little bit more serious, and I want to make sure we get this taken care of. And that's just great. She attributes that to the Apple Watch.
Yeah. And what's nice is that you can buy like a dedicated monitor that does the same thing, but who wants to walk around with all, this is just built into the watch that you were going to wear anyway.
Exactly.
So, this is one of those examples where, because it's convenient, it's there. It's like what people say that, the iPhone camera may not be the same as some SLR camera that's fancy that costs $1,500, but it's the one that's with you all the time. And so it's going to capture the picture, whereas your big camera is not with you. So just being there with you and easily accessible makes things so much more useful.
And I'm excited about the fact, we say this quite a bit, because Apple knows how important this is, it's just going to continue to get better. And I think that's really exciting on there as well. Okay, so you already mentioned this, but I just wanted to double down on this. It's a little bit of a shameless plug, but I think it's something that so many people are going to be interested in. I recorded this podcast on my Apps and Law website with Tara Cheever, co-founder of Lit Software, which has Trial Pad, Transcript Pad, Exhibits Pad now is the new app on there. And this is a little bit of a longer podcast, but Jeff, a lot of people have asked this question recently, just a few months ago. Lit Software went to a subscription service, right? You wrote about this. You did some great posts on iPhone JD about this, but I pushed Tara a little bit on this because I know a lot of people have been asking, like, why are we going to a subscription model? And she does an excellent job of explaining why, what the necessities, just like Microsoft and Adobe and a lot of other places are doing this. So I just wanted to encourage folks, if you wanted to know, Tara's fantastic too. You and I both have known Tara for many years.
Fantastic, yeah.
She's just a lot of fun to talk to, and she's got a lot of good stories, actually war stories about trials and supporting attorneys on there as well. So just wanted to point that out for folks to go and check out as well, if that's something that's interesting for everyone. And then, okay, so let's do some in the know. Let's talk about a couple of tips. And I think we're going to focus a little bit on some keynote tips, Jeff, which I was excited to see that you, in fact, do you want to go first? Because I love your tip a little bit more about how this kind of a workflow with doing a presentation, I think a PowerPoint keynote. Anyway, go ahead, please.
My point was this, Keynote is a great app on the iPad. It's also on the Mac and it's also on the iPhone. I like using it on the iPad because for me, the best presentations, if you're going to use slides, people talk about a PowerPoint presentation using PowerPoint generically, like we would use the word Kleenex generically. If you're going to create, slides for a presentation, I strongly encourage you to use as few words as possible and the most graphics and images as possible because it makes it more engaging. When you fill up your slides with words, people end up reading the words on your slide, squinting to read the words, and they don't pay attention to you, what you're saying. Use like a title on your slide and some bullet points if you need it, but better yet, some pictures. And this is where Keynote shines. PowerPoint's fine if you just want to type some words on a slide. Right. But for Keynote, if it's much easier to put pictures in. It has some cool advanced features like the Instant Alpha, which you can take a picture that you have and you can remove the outline, the border of it so that you just have the object. And that way you can put that object around your slide. Microsoft has a similar feature called Remove Background, but it doesn't work nearly as well in my experiences as Instant Alpha. So Keynote is great for creating presentations. And if you're going to give the presentation yourself, well, then just use your iPad and give the presentation. And again, I love the iPad because it's tangible. I'm using my finger to move things around the slide or it's hands-on as opposed to, using a mouse or something. So you can get it just right. But oftentimes, I give presentations with other people. And unless they happen to be iPad users, often they're just, they use boring PCs and they use boring PowerPoint. But what I wanted to emphasize as my tip today is don't give up Keynote just because you're going to be giving a co-presentation. I did one just a few weeks ago with somebody where I created the slides in Keynote, and then during the drafting process, I could export to PowerPoint so he could see them, or maybe export to PDF so he could just see how they would look. And then when I'm done with my slides in Keynote, as sort of a last step, you can export to PowerPoint. And when you bring in PowerPoint, you are moving from one program to another. So you need to double check your slides just to make sure that nothing got moved around. But 95% of the stuff was perfect just as is. I tweaked a couple things that didn't look the same in PowerPoint as they did in Keynote, and then I'm done. And so I've used a better tool for putting together my slides, even though ultimately we're using PowerPoint on a boring PC to present them. And also, just as a silly little bonus, when you use PowerPoint, people tend to use the built-in templates, and we all know what those templates are. We've seen them a million times. Whereas at least the Keynote templates, people don't use Keynote as often, so you're more likely to have a template that people are like, oh, that's an interesting one. I haven't seen that one before. People sit up and take notice. Exactly. So my tip is, number one, use Keynote. And number two, don't, even if your final product's going to be in PowerPoint, it's okay to start in Keynote. Right.
And by the way, most people probably know this. There is a PowerPoint app available for the iPad, and it is pretty good. But it just doesn't compare with, I think, the functionality, the usability, exactly what you were saying, Jeff. It's so much tangible within Keynote. And I love it. That Instant Alpha tool, which if most people don't know, like I will even use Keynote as a way to edit my photos sometimes because that tool is so good. Whether I'm on the iPad or on my Mac, I will use the Instant Alpha to take out a background and then I'll copy that picture into something else that maybe I'm working on. It is that good, and it's just amazing to be able to use that. I guess obviously Keynote is an Apple product, so maybe by default, it does work a little bit easier on the iPad. I'm not sure because the PowerPoint app is pretty good too. But
it doesn't have all the features of the desktop app.
No,
and it doesn't. For example, the remove background feature, I don't think that even exists in the iPad app.
Not on the iPad.
I couldn't find it. So
yeah. So that's great. Okay, so not to get too far away from the presentation motif, as it were, here's another tip that I love as well, especially if I'm using a Mac to give a presentation, because this works with the Mac. Instead of using, we all know those clickers for a remote presentation. I like to walk around on stage. I don't want to stand behind a lectern or a podium many times. But if I have my Mac connected to the projector and I'm giving a presentation that way, I will actually use my iPhone as my presentation remote. So I have Keynote, a presentation in Keynote on my Mac, and then I open the Keynote app on my iPhone, or I can't even do it on my iPad, but the iPhone's just a lot smaller to hold in my hand. And I can forward, advance, or jump back to different slides on my iPhone, and I can see the next slide coming up. I love that because, Jeff, in the old days, I used to print out my presentation and carry, flop around with a bunch of paper, walking around on stage. But I love being able to use this as my remote. Not to mention the fact that on my iPhone, I can do the slide navigator, just slide my finger from the left side, and I can scroll up and down and jump to whatever slide that I want to pull up at that time. Nobody sees anything different on the projector or the screen. Inevitably, every single time that I use this, Jeff, whether I'm presenting in front of a firm or, in front of a huge audience of CLE or something, people will say, how did you do that? That was just amazing. And it really is easy to set up. Now, this only works with Keynote on a Mac with an iPhone. They have to both be on the same network, but it's pretty amazing and seamless on how it works on there. Sometimes I'll even do it, frankly, even on a Zoom meeting. Today, I'm not doing live meetings, but I'll have the Keynote presentation on my laptop, and I'll literally stand back from the laptop and I'll control the presentation on my iPhone. So it just gives you a little bit more flexibility, but a lot more confidence because I can see what the next slide is. So I don't have any gaps and I don't try to read the slide, that kind of a thing.
I haven't really played
cool
with this, but it sounds like listening to you describe it, I can see how useful it is. It only works if you're presenting from your Mac, not if you're presenting from your iPad. Is that right?
You can do it from your iPad.
You can, because I haven't tried, because I always use my iPad when I give presentations. Right. I may have to try this out. The one feature I have used in the past is, in addition to using your iPhone as your remote, you can actually use your Apple Watch as your remote. I don't know if you've tried that. It works with Keynote, and so that you can actually tap a button on your Apple Watch to advance to the next slide. This is not my tip of the day. It is my anti-tip of the day because it's been a while since I've tried it, to be honest. But the last time I did try it, it lost its connection after a couple of slides. But I did start out my first few slides of the presentation, advancing them with my watch. And some people did say afterwards,
that's cool.
You were using your watch to change slides? I'm like, oh, yeah,
that's cool.
Little did I tell them that it stopped working after about 5-10 minutes. But
the
function is there. Maybe it works better today than it used to. But
I would trust tried the iPhone that.
More.
I got to tell you, for me, the iPhone, the screen on the iPhone is like the perfect size because I can see the current slide that I'm on. Of course, I can see it on the screen as well. But I see the next slide coming up.
That's the key. That's the key.
Exactly.
To be seamless in your presentation. And hopefully you know your slides well enough that you know what's next anyway. But I completely agree. When I present from my iPad, on my iPad, I have the presentation view. So I can see on the left the current slide and the right the next slide. But, that's just such a key part for giving presentations is knowing what's coming next so you can have a good transition into what's coming next.
Now, by the way,
I have to look at this. I'm glad that you shared this tip today.
Oh, good.
I feel like I'm your audience on this one. I got to try this one out.
Well, I would just say quickly, I like using to see the next slide coming up. But by the way, if you're one that uses like presenter notes, you can have that as the view as well. So in other words, you can just glance down and, hopefully it's just a couple of bullet points that you're looking at. But the point is that don't read the slides. Like you can have that in your hand and be able to advance and jump to whatever slide that you have on that as well. All right. You got to report back and see if it works.
Will do.
This is good stuff. Jeff, always fun talking with you. Thanks again for being here and see you next week.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.